The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of May 12, 2024. The podcast that trains AIs to fetch. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's traumatize the news of the bogus. And we start with the Trump classified documents case where pretrial motions are flying fast in Florida. It seems that Jack Smith's prosecution team misfiled and misclassified an unknown but non-zero number of the documents in question. A recent filing from Trump's legal team read, quote, "On the afternoon of Friday, May 3, 2024, the special counsel's office disclosed to the court and the defendants that the prosecution team has failed to maintain the integrity of the contents of at least some of the boxes obtained from Mar-a-Lago." In other words, the people prosecuting Trump for mishandling classified documents mishandled classified documents. Turns out, when they took the boxes full of papers from Mar-a-Lago during that infamous raid, they marked many of these documents with placeholder sheets of paper. When trying to piece together the contents of those boxes, the FBI's Washington field office had to get them all back together in the right order. Quote, "Using a dismissive and condescending tone to address serious contentions relating to those issues raised by Waltine Nada, the office admitted that there are some boxes where the order of items within that box is not the same as in the associated scans." The office then attempted to bury in a footnote their concession that the disclosure is inconsistent with what government counsel previously understood and represented to the court. Although the office cited to an apparent misrepresentation at the April 12, 2024 conference, the office has repeatedly, essentially from day one, provided full-throated but now conceitedly false assertions of compliance with their discovery obligations. So the May 3rd claims are inconsistent with their previous claims to the court, where they claimed that all evidence had been preserved and was available to the defense. Their own remarks show that the prosecution previously lied to the court. According to the prosecutors themselves, quote, "In many, but not all instances, the FBI was able to determine which document with classification markings corresponded to a particular placeholder sheet." That was from the May 3 document, number 522 in the docket if you want to read it for yourself. And that means there's no way to recreate a complete and reliable inventory of the boxes. Judge Cannon had initially required the appointment of a special master to oversee the handling of the documents, something the 11th Circuit overturned. Now, it seems like they should have listened to her. Quote, "During the review of discovery and preparation of pretrial motions, President Trump's counsel had relied on the scans and believed that the location of allegedly classified documents within the boxes was exculpatory. Indeed, it was our understanding that most and potentially all of the charged documents were buried within the boxes and located next to other items that provided favorable context regarding, inter alia, when the document was placed in a box. It never occurred to us until last Friday that the prosecution team could not be trusted to perform the basic task of maintaining the integrity of such evidence despite the expansive resources at their disposal." And by the way, that famous picture where they spread the documents around higgledy-piggledy on the floor? Those top-secret cover sheets you saw were ones they added. They are not original to the boxes or documents. And not all of those were those nicely printed sheets. When they ran out of sheets, they just made some hand-printed ones and stuck them in the boxes. In addition, it's come out that the General Services Administration contacted Trump's team, saying there were 6 pallets of boxes that needed to be transferred to his home. 4 were sent to Mar-a-Lago. While this case was being set up and the raid prepared. So the government is giving him boxes at the same time they were preparing to raid him for taking boxes. We don't yet know what Judge Cannon is going to do, but she vacated the May 20 trial date in order to deal with these new revelations. Even if it's not a setup, it's still blatant destruction of potentially exculpatory evidence that should mean the instant dismissal of the case. If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odysee.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odysee is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odysee to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odysee.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. So, a bunch of Democrats in the Colorado State House passed the latest assault weapons ban. Thankfully, it was rejected in the Senate. Interestingly, by Democrats as well. Yeah, the bill was so bad, they couldn't get it by other Democrats. I was going to read you the definition of assault rifle in the bill, but it's 6 pages long. I linked it in the show notes if you want to see the monstrosity for yourself. The House passed it amid screeching of mass shootings and was proposed as needed to protect our children and all the usual crap. But when it got to the Senate, a swing vote on the committee, Senator Tom Sullivan, whose son was killed in the 2012 Aurora movie theater shooting, actually opposed the bill, saying it won't be effective. He's not taking a principled Second Amendment stance or saying how it would be great if more armed people could stop mass shootings. He just thinks it won't work, but other gun control measures will. He pointed out that the ban would spur a rush to buy the firearms before they're banned, increasing the number in circulation. He said, quote, "If I had thought a ban was the way to go, I would have done it the day after Alex was murdered with one." And before you go celebrating too hard, there were other gun control laws that they passed, including mandatory training to get a permit, requiring them to be locked when inside a vehicle, liability insurance, higher taxes on guns and ammo, and a license requirement on gun dealers who already have to get a federal license. What's interesting is that the bill's sponsor, Tim Hernandez, said that the bill was stopped because, quote, "folks aren't ready. That's what it boils down to." So he's openly admitting that he's using the parable of the frog in a frying pan to pass things slowly one by one until we wake up one day and all our rights are gone. At least it's nice to have them acknowledge that every now and then. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.pagosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.pagosity.tv. So, Proton Mail is in the news, coming under scrutiny for handing over user data to the Spanish government despite assurances of user privacy. Proton Mail is a secure and private email service based in Switzerland, ostensibly so it won't have to turn over sensitive data. It also has end-to-end encryption and a no-logs policy. But earlier in 2021, it came out that the French police tracked down and arrested a climate activist based on IP data that Proton Mail handed over. According to Swiss law, the company was obligated to collect and provide the information to Swiss authorities, who passed it on to French police. This time, it's the Spanish police, and the information turned over was the recovery email of a man suspected to be a member of Catalonia's police force. It's actually good because it's just a testament to how little Proton Mail has about you. Just a recovery email, which you don't have to provide. Despite demands, they just didn't have anything else to turn over. But once the Spanish had it, all they had to do then was go to Apple and give them the email address to get the rest. In both cases, the requests were made under the guise of anti-terrorism laws, but they were actually used against protesters, raising significant free speech and justification issues. According to their transparency report, Proton Mail has complied with 5,971 orders to turn over data on individuals in the last year, and contested 407. Of course, the real issue is that Proton Mail is a centralized entity, whereas a completely distributed solution will be able to protect its users because there wouldn't be anyone for the government to make the demand to or act against if the information wasn't turned over. The people behind Odyssey have been teasing new technology to do exactly that. We'll have to see what they come up with. Until then, the usual OPSEC applies. Be careful what recovery emails and phone numbers you use, and keep in mind they can be traced back to you. Use disposable emails, VPNs, and Tor, but be mindful of their limitations. Use anonymous payment methods, and consider the legal jurisdiction of the products you use and their policies on complying with requests from international law enforcement. Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-aged children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins. And now it's time to orthogonalize this week's biggest bogon emitter. CNN, like almost everyone on the left and a good portion of those on the right, just has to do everything they can to make it seem like anyone other than government is to blame for inflation. Of course, it's those greedy retailers who, according to the headline, quote, jacked up prices and squeezed customers. Like, they just decided to do that. All of them. Without exception. At the same time. Must be a conspiracy. So why hasn't it continued? They reported, quote, retailers are feeling jittery. Consumers aren't shopping like they used to. In a game of chicken between stores and shoppers, it's the stores that appear to be yielding first by dropping prices on thousands of products. Yeah, that happens with economic contractions that follow inflation. Quote, the markdowns come as inflation has pushed prices higher for the past 2 years, squeezing Americans and forcing them to choose between wants and needs. So inflation is pushing prices up, stores are finding ways to drop prices nonetheless, and it's still their fault. Got it. So, how to make them still seem greedy? It's all about what kind of products got their prices slashed. Quote, it's telling that these are categories considered to be discretionary purchases, meaning things that are nice to have, but maybe aren't everyday necessities in the same vein as groceries and medicine. Yes, because demand for those dropped. In economic terms, the demand curve shifted to the left, dropping both prices and quantities. Retail sales have been creeping back upward overall, but more specifically, that hasn't been the case with furniture, clothing, sporting goods, and electronics. Zach Stambor of eMarketer said, quote, "A lot of retailers have said that discretionary spending is slowing. People are buying essentials. They're also trading down in prices and then calling it a day. If you want to convince consumers to spend, you have to give them a reason to do so. Lower prices are a clear opportunity to drive people into the store or online." And Jesper Broden, CEO of Inca Group, IKEA's holding company, said, quote, "This is not rocket science, really. We lower our prices, in particular when we are in times when people have less money in their pockets. The last 6 to 8 months definitely have been slower than we have ever seen." Makes sense. So what's with all the bloviating about retailers gouging prices and everything? In fact, reading through the rest of the article, it's mostly from people making good points about how retailers respond to low sales, especially after a period of inflation as their paychecks struggle to keep up. So what's with that whole game of chicken stuff? Of course, most people just glance through the headlines and only read certain stories. Those people will only have seen the bit about retailers jacked up prices and squeezed customers. And they won't see, as they would if they'd read the article, how CNN ended up completely contradicting that. It's deceptive and intended to push a political agenda while pointing the finger of blame other than where it belongs. Which is pretty much what we've come to expect from the news media. So all of that makes CNN this week's biggest bogon emitter. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now let's pre-accommodate this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week it goes to 2 states who seem like they might be the first dominoes in the latest stupidity trend among the states since banning porn, lab-grown meat. We'll start off in Florida with Governor DeSantis signing legislation to prohibit its sale. His office said in a statement, quote, "Florida is taking action to stop the World Economic Forum's goal of forcing the world to eat lab-grown meat and insects, an overlooked source of protein." What do insects have to do with this? Quote, "While the World Economic Forum is telling the world to forego meat consumption, Florida is increasing meat production and encouraging residents to continue to consume and enjoy 100% real Florida beef." So, meat sells only good when in cow. Got it. DeSantis said, quote, "Today, Florida is fighting back against the global elite's plan to force the world to eat meat grown in a petri dish." They don't use petri dishes. Or bugs. They don't use bugs either. To achieve their authoritarian goals. Our administration will continue to focus on investing in our local farmers and ranchers, and we will save our beef. Yeah, I'll believe that when your state nullifies the Agricultural Adjustment Act and allows local farmers to sell to grocery stores. Florida Commissioner of Agriculture Wilton Simpson said, quote, Florida is taking a tremendous step in the right direction by signing first-in-the-nation legislation banning lab-grown meat. We must protect our incredible farmers and the integrity of American agriculture. And we have to protect our incredible candle makers from the sun and make everyone board up their homes. Quote, Lab-grown meat is a disgraceful attempt to undermine our proud traditions and prosperity and is in direct opposition to authentic agriculture. Change bad! Quote, I applaud Governor DeSantis, Senate President Kathleen Passidomo, House Speaker Paul Renner, Senator Jay Collins, and Representative Danny Alvarez for standing up for Florida's farmers and consumers. Together, we will keep Florida's agricultural industry strong and thriving. Yeah, your state almost provides as much meat as Kentucky. Well done. Seriously, are Florida cattle ranchers really that big of a special interest? But yeah, mention the World Economic Forum a few more times. That'll make it make sense. Keep in mind, we're not talking about plant-based substances like Impossible Foods. This process starts by taking a small sample of animal stem cells and feeding them a mix of amino acids, sugars, salts, and vitamins for a few weeks, targeting their development so they make muscle, fat, and connective tissue. They naturally grow into edible meat, identical ingredient-wise to regular meat. Of course, there's a long way to go before it's identical in every way, including texture, fiber, and structures that make things like ribeye steak unique. But isn't that a choice the consumer should make for themselves? And getting a few donor cells from an animal seems a lot better than putting them in extreme confinement, feeding feces to pigs, grinding up dead chicks, and all sorts of other horrors we've seen from the big factory farms. It's also hard to imagine how these could be contaminated with E. coli and listeria. The USDA just made another public health alert about E. coli contaminated meat. At least they're honest about the real reason for this bill, which is protecting beef farmers from competition, instead of trying to make bogus claims about health and safety like the organic and GMO crazies. But I guess that's why they're left with platitudes, like what State Representative Dean Black said, quote, Cultured meat is made by man. Real meat is made by God himself. Yeah, God made the E. coli too. You'd think, though, that the expense of lab-grown meat would make it easier for traditional farmers to compete. Lab-grown meat would cost about $20 per pound compared with $5 or so for cow-based beef. So let's go north of the Panhandle to Alabama. There, they're actually threatening 3 months in jail and a $500 fine for selling or manufacturing cultivated meat. That's one-upping Florida's penalty of 60 days. So that's Republicans in 2 states that don't like a free market. Learn to see past the rhetoric, people. In fact, the wonderfully Orwellian name of the group that supported the Alabama bill was Freedom Health Alabama, which referred to the technology as Frankenmeat. Pepin Andrew Tuma, legislative director at the nonprofit Good Food Institute, said, quote, With these short-sighted laws, Alabama and Florida politicians are trampling on consumer choice and criminalizing agricultural innovation. At a time when American farmers and manufacturers face stiff competition around the world, states can either support new initiatives that create thousands of good-paying jobs, or they can play politics and police the foods people eat. When they're done with distractions and political theater, we hope these public servants will remember their former affinity for free markets and free speech. Carrie Cabot at Eat Just, one of just 2 U.S. companies cleared to sell cultivated meat, said, quote, This legislation has always been about one thing, helping one industry, Big Ag, avoid accountability and competition. Today, these multinational corporations and their lobbyists won. China will also be celebrating as they are closer to overcoming our nation's lead in this emerging sector. The other company is Upside Foods. Their chief legal officer, Sean Edgett, said, quote, Legislation that bans cultivated meat is a reckless move that ignores food safety experts and science, stifles consumer choice, and hinders American innovation. It makes politicians the food police, and it ignores the food safety experts at USDA and FDA who have deemed it safe. This law does not protect consumers. It protects entrenched interests, defies free market principles, and impedes progress and job creation. Tell politicians that they should not control what you eat and support food innovation for a brighter future. The fact is, it should be a basic fundamental principle that you and you alone have the sole right to decide what does and does not go into your own body, whether it's cultivated meat, raw milk, a vaccine, or whatever. If you don't like lab-grown meat, don't eat it. Simple as that. So all of that makes Florida and Alabama this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this Don't Be a Lasagna edition of the Bogosity Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord or at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Frederick Bastiat. Competition is merely the absence of oppression. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.